Hi everyone! Last week we took a look at a video by atheist YouTuber Telltale, who was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, so he has a lot to say about cults. And to be fair, I don't want to misrepresent his position. It seems that he recognizes that veganism is not actually a cult, but he does view it as cult-like and extreme. Today I'll be responding to his second video titled, Are Vegans Extremists? If you didn't catch part 1, it's linked below.
So let's take a look at the question, is veganism versus vegetarianism an extreme position? Before we get into this, I feel like I need to put on record that I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan. However, I agree with the vast majority of what Alex had to say. I agree that factory farming is bad. I agree that we should not just dramatically improve how we treat animals, but change the way we view them completely. People view animals as property. We should recognize that they're living, sentient beings and should be afforded respect and decency. If we approach things from that perspective, then I think the world would look very different from what it looks like now. But we do have disagreements on the subject, so let's look at how our views differ and why I call veganism an extreme position versus vegetarianism.
In the words of Gary Yourofsky,
that is pure, unadulterated lip service. That's the definition of lip service.
But seriously, what does it mean to respect someone and treat them decently? You say that you agree with Alex that we should respect animals and treat them decently, but your idea of respect and fair treatment clearly differs from his. You say that animals are sentient beings and they shouldn't be viewed as commodities, yet you view them as food, a commodity. Actions speak louder than words.
First of all, there's a lot of propaganda spreading around about this subject, like what actually happens at slaughterhouses. My neighbor works at a slaughterhouse. He kills animals all the exact same way. He takes a and fires, lights out. That's how it happens in the vast majority of slaughterhouses in the US. Now, I can't speak for outside the US. I'm sure there's some weird shit going on in other less developed countries, but my neighbor's workplace has a federal inspector on site 24/7 to make sure everything is above board. They will shut the place down for almost anything. In fact, the place had a leak in their roof recently, and they shut it down for 2 days until it got fixed. This is an area of the law that is actually heavily regulated. There are some pretty detailed and grisly descriptions of the process coming out in the veganism movement, and they're just not true. Or if they are true, then they're fringe cases and they should be stopped.
Now, I'm not saying that all vegans spread this kind of propaganda. Obviously, they don't. And I'm not saying that all vegans are only vegan as a result of this type of propaganda. There are plenty of very good reasons to not consume animal products. But it's a problem in the movement that needs to be addressed. If propaganda is being spread from any movement, even the movements I'm a part of, then it should absolutely be called out. It's unacceptable. If you're lying, twisting the truth, or manipulating people in some way in the name of a movement, then you don't deserve to be a part of the movement, whatever it might be.
Oh boy. First of all, you can't hold up your neighbor's personal anecdote as evidence of how the vast majority of slaughterhouses operate in the US. Second, I've already illustrated how horrific the slaughter process is, even when pigs are stunned with a bolt gun. Third, did you ever think that maybe, just maybe, working at a slaughterhouse requires the suppression of empathy, which often involves deluding oneself into believing that the animals don't actually suffer? Of course, misinformation can spread among well-meaning people. Vegans get shit wrong from time to time. But this in no way supports the argument that veganism itself is extreme. Also, save the lecture, dude. If you want to comment on how much more effective the vegan movement could be, join the movement. Otherwise, shut the hell up.
So why do I say it's extremist? First of all, how do I define extremism? Whether this is the definition others are working with or not, it's the definition I'm working with. So when I use the term, you guys will know what I mean. When I say extreme thinking, I'm talking about a couple specific things. First, I'm talking about black and white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking, erasing nuance from the conversation. An example of it in the veganism movement is, you absolutely can't use any animal product no matter what, under any circumstances, period. Can't use the eggs of a chicken, even if it's well taken care of. And if you do use the eggs of a chicken who's well taken care of, or if you accidentally eat something that indirectly contributed to the factory farming industry, then you're evil. You're one of them. Who knows how many people or animals were lost as a result of what you did. That's one aspect to the extremist thinking.
I'm glad he makes an effort to define his terms. He's using the word extreme in the negative sense. But he is completely misrepresenting veganism here. Veganism is defined as a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. Nowhere does it say that you cannot, under any circumstances, use animal products, even accidentally. If I were Alex, I would be insulted because he explained this.
And then there's the point that I added to the bite model, placing extreme or exaggerated importance on an event or idea. Something you'll find the most extreme of the extreme do is they'll boycott an industry to their own detriment. Jehovah's Witnesses exclude themselves from a major societal event, like Christmas, because of some weak, perceived pagan roots. Take that to its logical end.
Almost everything we do in society has quote-unquote pagan roots. Using wedding rings, wearing jewelry at all, keeping cats as pets, knocking on wood to ward off bad luck, wearing makeup, naming the days of the week, toasting at weddings. What's next? What else are Jehovah's Witnesses going to give up in the name of principle? And literally nothing else. They already disavow toasting, celebrating birthdays, or celebrating basically anything for that matter. Using piñatas. What else are they prepared to give up? And what good are they actually doing by giving this stuff up? Are they accomplishing anything at all? Is it actually helping anything by not buying Christmas-themed candy around the holidays? No, it's not. It's a symbolic gesture that doesn't help, or really even hurt, basically anybody. The companies are still doing just fine despite losing revenue from Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a group of 8.5 million people. They're only hurting themselves by separating themselves more and more from society. If they really want to do something to remove Christmas from culture, they're doing it the wrong way. And in my eyes, it's the same thing with vegans going out of their way to change their entire lifestyle so dramatically. You can sit there and say it's not that expensive or complicated to change your life to conform to these standards. And that may be true. Hell, maybe it's cheaper, but it's still a dramatic change. And when you change your life that dramatically, judging people for not being like you almost always comes as a package deal. It's part of the mindset. You're putting in all this work because you believe it's the right thing. It becomes a contest. Who can be more righteous in the eyes of God? Who can be most extreme? Who can go the furthest? The person who separates themselves from this or that industry the most wins. I see Jehovah's Witnesses do it all the time. Now, does that mean I think you're a bad person for being vegan? No. Does it mean I think you're doing more harm than good? No, absolutely not. Do I think you're doing anything productive at all? No, I don't. I think the only thing you're accomplishing by dramatically changing your lifestyle like that is setting yourself down a road of extremism. The further down this path you go, the more dramatically you change your lifestyle for this movement, the more judgmental you become, the deeper you go. It's a positive feedback loop.
This is complete nonsense. Veganism does not require that you separate yourself from society, and millions of vegans can attest that boycotting these industries is not detrimental to our well-being. Humans are adaptive. Our taste buds adapt. We adapt to lifestyle changes. Right now, you may think that if you were to give up animal products, you would feel deprived. But I used to say that I could never be a vegetarian, let alone a vegan, and here I am, 8 years later, still vegan and not deprived. Even the most quote-unquote extreme vegans who have taken the Liberation Pledge and refuse to sit at a table where animals are being eaten still participate in holiday festivities and family events. They just exclude themselves at mealtime. Whether or not this is effective is debatable, but their rationale is completely understandable. Anyway, this comparison is just absurd. There's a huge difference between vegans boycotting animal products and Jehovah's Witnesses boycotting holidays. And that is the reason behind the boycott. Jehovah's Witnesses are following a set of rules that have no rational basis. Vegans are trying to liberate animals. And of course he brings up the judgmental, self-righteous vegan stereotype. I have an entire video debunking this, but in short, vegans can certainly be judgmental, but oftentimes vegans are accused of being judgmental for simply expressing good judgment. Judgment is not inherently wrong, it depends on the context. Everybody judges. Owen is making a judgment about vegans here. A poor one, in my opinion. There is no evidence that vegans are more judgmental and sanctimonious than average. But whether or not this stereotype is true is irrelevant to the question of whether it's right or wrong to exploit animals. Atheists can be judgmental, but that has no bearing on the validity of their claims.
Now, that's not to say that boycotting companies or canceling people who do something really messed up can't be a useful tool in the arsenal for change. Canceling and boycotting can be tools for change, but the further down the path you go, the more ready to cancel and boycott you'll be. If boycotting and canceling isn't a well-organized, widespread effort, the only people it hurts is you.
I'm under no illusion that a boycott alone will bring about animal liberation. If we want policy change, we need to engage in ballot initiatives, pressure campaigns, and direct action. But Owen has failed to demonstrate that the vegan boycott is ineffective. The market for plant-based alternatives has exploded over the past decade. Sure, in some cases, abstaining from animal products has no direct effect on supply chains and is merely symbolic. But it sends a powerful message to those around us that it is possible and practicable to live without animal products. It shines a light on carnism, the invisible belief system that most people aren't even aware of having.
I was talking to Mr. Atheist the other day about which is the best solution to a problem. Should we cancel people, or is sunlight the best disinfectant? People often hold up Milo Yiannopoulos as an example of a time when canceling somebody worked. The dude was canceled and he's broke as shit now. Nobody's buying his books, nobody's inviting him to speaking events, nobody will hire him. Dude was straight up canceled, and it worked. But did it? Was he canceled? Is that why he's broke now? No, not really. For better or worse, he continued going to speaking events. He continued saying the stupid shit he says. And the shit only got stupider, until he said something so stupid that even the people on his side couldn't stand behind it. That's what you need for canceling or boycotting to hurt the company instead of hurting you. You need massive public support. You need to change minds. There's something in politics called the Overton Window. It's the window of acceptable public discourse. Right now in the US, communism is outside of the Overton Window. Nobody takes a discussion about communism seriously. Whether they should or not is irrelevant. You can expect to be laughed off stage if you start endorsing communist ideas, in most cases. But there's a tipping point in society. When an idea is talked about by enough people, it can't be ignored. It needs to be faced head-on. There have been times in history when Buddhist monks would self-immolate as a form of protest. And to their credit, it did move the Overton Window far enough to draw public attention to the issues. But it's completely unnecessary, and it made them look like nutcases. It damaged the credibility of their movement, even if it did draw more attention to it. Not to mention the fact that there have been times throughout history when that approach didn't work.
How does he think social justice movements work? In order to gain massive public support, people have to be willing to speak up and defend their radical ideas, facing inevitable backlash. That's how you shift the Overton Window. To quote Margaret Mead, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."
So how do we win this war of ideas? How do we get people to recognize that animals should have rights? Metaphorical self-immolation through things like extreme forms of boycotts and dramatic lifestyle changes is one way, but it leads people down an extremist hole that they don't have to go down. Talk about it. Raise awareness about the issue. Convince people. Discuss it. You don't have to cancel anybody. You don't have to boycott anything. You don't have to change everything about yourself and the way you live to make change. You doing that isn't hurting anybody but you.
First of all, to put boycotting animal products as a form of protest in the same category as lighting yourself on fire is insane. Do I really need to explain why? Well, I don't want to make an assertion without an argument. So, choosing plant-based options at the grocery store and taking your kids to the science museum instead of the zoo does not significantly impact your well-being. Living in a non-vegan world, you may have to deal with the occasional inconvenience, but it's a small sacrifice to make. Committing suicide is the ultimate sacrifice, and it greatly diminishes the well-being of those close to you. I can't believe I had to spell that out. This idea that you have to dramatically change your life is a straw man. Veganism does not require that you change everything about yourself and the way you live. All it requires is a little bit of research and a few simple swaps. And if it does radically change you, it's likely for the better. When he says that we should just talk about it, raise awareness, and try to convince people of what exactly? Most people are already convinced that factory farming is bad in the sense that they'll pay lip service. But lip service doesn't get us anywhere. We are trying to convince people to walk the talk, align their actions with their values, to be the change they wish to see in the world. And in order to be convincing, you have to practice what you preach. You don't have to boycott anything. What in the hell? What kind of message does it send to say you're against factory farming while you chow down on the flesh and secretions of factory farmed animals? You're talking out of both sides of your mouth.
There was a saying going around communities that were fighting for communism. The capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them. You have to live and work in this system, but you can use the system against itself. Just be careful not to use it against yourself, because that's where an extremist path takes you. Eventually, as you go down a path of extremism, the next thing to go is your language. You change the way you speak. For those of you following along, this one is loaded language and cliches on the bite model. Each step you take moves you further and further away from normal society. Now you might say, good. I don't want to be a part of a system that blah blah blah. Insert thing here. Humans have taken part in some very bad stuff throughout history, and there have historically been very valid reasons to not want to be a part of this institution or that movement. But one of the keys to deprogramming extremists is keeping their guard down. The moment their guard goes up is the moment the conversation is over. Even if you're doing these things for the right reasons, and this institution really is horrific and needs to be done away with immediately, like what was going on in America before the 1860s, and hell, even after the 1860s. Or what happens right now on factory farms. Convincing people is your primary goal. Because without public support, you've got nothing. The more of a nutcase you look like, the fewer people are going to listen. You need to approach this in a manner that at least looks like it fits within their Overton window, or looks like it borders on the edge of it, because you'll never get people to listen otherwise, even if you are way outside of the Overton window. I don't like it any more than you do. People are going to instantly discredit you if you're outside of their Overton window.
The fact that it is impossible and impracticable to avoid participating in capitalism does not justify frivolous consumption. We have no choice but to fight the system within the system, but when we do have a choice, we should choose better. Most of us have the privilege of choosing what goes in our mouths. You may have to burn some fossil fuels to fight climate change, but in no circumstance does eating bacon and eggs help fight carnism.
When I talk to a Jehovah's Witness, I don't start out by saying, "Hi, I'm Owen and I'm an atheist. I think everything you believe is bullshit from top to bottom." First of all, I would never swear around a Jehovah's Witness. Not because swearing is wrong, but because they'll instantly label me as bad association and shut down. I come in as somebody they think they can convince. I provide a give and take in the conversation. If I give some compromise in the conversation, then they'll do the same. Even if I think their belief system is wrong and outright harmful to society, I'm not going to convince them by saying that outright. It's the same with veganism. I'm not going to convince anybody in the meat or farming industry that what they're doing is wrong by throwing red paint on all their stuff. And I'm sure as hell not going to convince them by moving my own lifestyle in a progressively more extreme direction. And this stuff doesn't just apply to veganism. This is an illustration of black and white extremist thinking more generally. This can apply to anything. So that's why I say veganism is an extremist position versus vegetarianism.
Usually the people who drone on about how protesting doesn't accomplish anything are the ones who insist that we should just lead by example. But Owen is going a step further and saying that even that won't convince anyone, so changing your lifestyle is pointless. And remember earlier when he defined extreme as having a black and white, us versus them, good versus evil mentality, and placing an exaggerated importance on an event or idea? He has failed to provide a coherent example of how veganism fits this definition. The examples he provides only demonstrate that veganism is extreme in the sense that it falls outside of the Overton window. To say that something is extreme because it's unpopular and requires going against the grain and modifying your behavior is not to say that it produces black and white thinking and dogmatism. He's doing a semantic bait and switch.
But before I end the video, I feel like I need to make something very clear. I am not a communist. I'm not even a socialist, by any stretch of the imagination. Those of you who follow me on Twitter or watch my podcast already know my political positions, but I know most of you don't, so I wanted to make that clear. And one more thing, I don't believe Cosmic Skeptic is an extremist either. I think he's using extreme tactics and he's dramatically changed his lifestyle, but I think he's smart as they come and I respect the hell out of him. As I said before, I agree with him on basically everything pertaining to this subject. Factory farming is wrong. Animal treatment needs to be improved, even completely reframed. Animals deserve rights and better treatment. I am 100% there. I just disagree with his approach. I don't think boycotting hurts anybody except for you without widespread public support. And the only way to get widespread public support is by talking about it, which is why I gave him the opportunity to do so on my channel.
Let me get this straight. He doesn't think Alex is an extremist. he thinks veganism is extreme. Alex is vegan, but he's not an extremist. Other vegans are extremists because boycotting animal products is extreme. Hashtag not all though, not Alex. Again, we don't have to change our behavior to align with our values. We just have to talk about our supposed values. This is precisely what people hate about politicians. Essentially, he's arguing that lip service is more effective than a boycott. In what universe?
I can't speak for anybody. There's a wide diversity of thought in these movements, but I can speak for myself. And in my own personal view, the primary difference between veganism and vegetarianism is the boycotting and canceling aspect. One is fighting factory farming and cruelty, and the other takes it a step further into lifestyle territory. That's why I say one is extreme and the other is not.
The difference between veganism and vegetarianism is that veganism is a social justice movement with the goal of animal liberation, and vegetarianism is carnism light. Without stepping into lifestyle territory, how exactly are you fighting factory farming and cruelty? Please explain how vegetarians are fighting factory farming by boycotting meat, but vegans are just hurting themselves by boycotting eggs and dairy. Also, explain how vegetarians are fighting animal cruelty while simultaneously supporting it. The majority of eggs and dairy come from factory farms, but it's important to note that labels like free range and cage-free are incredibly deceiving. Conditions on organic farms are only marginally better for the animals. And let's just indulge this fantasy for a second. Let's say the whole world goes vegetarian. How do you produce eggs and dairy without killing the animals for meat? Egg-laying hens and dairy cows become spent after a few years when their production drops dramatically. Do we just let them live out the rest of their lives on sanctuaries and continue to feed them, which would require a metric fuck-ton of resources? A typical dairy cow is 5 years old when she's sent to slaughter. The natural lifespan of a cow is around 20 years. So should we continue to breed more cows for milk while caring for all these useless retired animals? What about the male calves? What do we do with them? This makes no goddamn sense. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out Cosmic Skeptic's speech titled "It's Time to Go Vegan" in the description box below. And take some time to research the industries you're supporting. Don't just take your neighbor who works at a slaughterhouse or your uncle who works on a farm's word for it. If you think about it, the standard industry practices are just as horrific as the footage we see of farm workers kicking and punching the animals. People often react more strongly to acts like this because it registers as such needless and senseless violence. But the entire practice of breeding, exploiting, and killing animals is needless and senseless. Feel free to tweet this video at Owen so he sees it. Alright, peace out.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them